But what we see in Lewis's vision of the world is that our sexed bodies are themselves pointers to something else. The primordial, fundamental archetype, which is typified in maleness and femaleness, is the polarity between the masculine and the feminine. And this polarity holds true for things that cannot be classified as male or female. Hi everyone, this is Seraphim Hamilton. Now, I'm not usually one to just jump on a popular bandwagon to get clicks, but today I want to talk to you about something which is a little bit of a trending topic because I really care about this issue. And I also think it provides us a useful opportunity to consider the deeper nature of the issues involved and derive some interesting insight into the world in its own right. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard this news that Netflix is considering casting Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia, if you've been living under a rock, as Meryl Streep. In other words, changing Aslan's sex from male to female. Now, there's some things about this that really don't need stating. So, for example, this is going to tank the franchise. We all know this. It's unlikely, if this happens, that more than one or two of these movies are going to be made. So this is an obvious truth. That itself provokes interesting questions as to, the nature of our plausibility structure. So anyone could think this is a good idea. So that's interesting, but it's obvious that the franchise will tank. Another obvious fact is that C.S. Lewis would have been profoundly disappointed in this and would not approve, though undoubtedly we will see many articles published in The Atlantic and other major publications giving us reasons why actually C.S. Lewis would have thought this was a wonderful idea. But we all know that that's not true, no matter what anybody says. The most interesting question, though, the one that we're actually going to take time to reflect on today, is why Lewis would have disapproved of this change. Considering this question will help us understand what Lewis saw in the world, which is just how deeply rooted sex and gender are in the very nature of creation. So before we get all into this, I do want to mention that at the end of this month, I'm going to be getting a course on proving that Jesus is the Messiah from the Pentateuch with St. Athanasius College. You can get the link and the details in the pinned comment, and that's going to be $50. You get both the live sessions and you get the recordings of those sessions, both discussion and lecture-based. I hope to see you there. So getting into this issue, I want to start by reading a passage that I'm sure other people have quoted about this. I haven't actually watched any of the reaction videos to this, but I'm sure people have brought this passage up because it is the first passage anyone who has read Lewis in any kind of depth is going to think of in relation to this topic. And this is from Paralandra. So if you're not familiar, Paralandra is the second novel in C.S. Lewis's Cosmic Trilogy, sometimes called the Space Trilogy. Lewis's Cosmic Trilogy was published a little more than a decade, I believe, before the Chronicles of Narnia. And unlike Narnia, which were children's books, the Cosmic Trilogy was written for an adult audience. Those who are acquainted with both Narnia and the Cosmic Trilogy are going to be able to see a myriad of common ideas which bind these books together. But this passage is useful in establishing precisely why it is so obscene to rewrite Aslan as a female character, given the fundamental convictions that Lewis has about the nature of reality. So the scene I'm about to read from is one in which the main character, and by the way, spoiler alert, Ransom, meets the heavenly archons or angelic rulers of the planets Mars and Venus. So in these books, you have a very profound synthesis between the medieval vision of the cosmos and the contemporary scientific vision of what's called outer space. And Lewis shows how actually many of the convictions that we have about the universe are not derived from the sciences, even though we think that they are. And he places this medieval vision of the cosmos in harmony with what we know about the physical structure of the universe out there or up there. So in this vision, every planet is piloted through its celestial sphere by its respective angel or archon. So you might be familiar with this traditional image of a god who is piloting the sun through the heaven like a chariot. And this is the vision that we see in Lewis's novels, but it's sort of a god who's worshipped in its own right. It's, of course, an angel who is a servant of God. And these angels, moreover, embody the fundamental archetypes or ideas or symbols which gets concretized in the material life of the planet. So, for example, Venus, which is always changing and giving birth to new life, well, that idea of change and birth giving, that is embodied in the nature of the angel who guides Venus through the heavens. Now, this is a crucial point in itself. For Lewis, who is an ambassador for a traditional vision of reality, meaning, symbolism, idea, thought, both precedes and is determinative for material existence. The very idea of two-ness precedes the existence of any particular thing which can be categorized as a dyad. So the idea of two obviously precedes any group of two mice or coffee cups or whatever. Now, this intersection between meaning and matter is reflected at every layer of our language. We're able, in other words, to speak about the world because the world is designed in such a way as to be susceptible to speech or cognition. There are certain ideas which exist in their most intense form in the infinite life of God, ideas which are concretely embodied and reflected in the visible material world. So here, Lewis describes Mars and Venus, which are the names given both to the planets and to their angelic archons or pilots. He describes these angels as embodying the archetypal sense of the masculine and the feminine. So I'm going to give you an extended quotation from Paralandra here. Both of the bodies of the angels, were naked, and both were free from any sexual characteristics, either primary or secondary. That one would have expected. But whence came this curious difference between them, that is, between the forms of Mars and Venus, the angels of Mars and Venus? He found that he could point to no single feature wherein the difference resided, yet it was impossible to ignore. One could try, Ransom had tried 100 times, to put it into words. He has said that Malacandra, now that's the name for Mars, was like rhythm, and Paralandra, which is the name for Venus, is like melody. He has said that Malacandra affected him like a quantitative, Paralandra like an accentual meter. He thinks that the first held its hand something like its spear, but the hands of the other were open with the palms toward him. But I don't know that any of these attempts helped me much. At all events, what Ransom saw at that moment was the real meaning of gender. Everyone must sometimes have wondered why in nearly all tongues certain inanimate objects are masculine and others feminine. What is masculine about a mountain or feminine about certain trees? Ransom has cured me of believing that this is a purely morphological phenomenon, depending on the form of the word. Still less is gender an imaginative extension of sex. Our ancestors did not make mountains masculine because they projected male characteristics into them. The real process is the reverse. Gender is a reality, and a more fundamental reality than sex. Sex is, in fact, merely the adaptation to organic life of a fundamental polarity which divides all created beings. Female sex is simply one of the things that have feminine gender. There are many others. And masculine and feminine meet us on planes of reality where male and female would simply be meaningless. Masculine is not attenuated male, nor feminine attenuated female. On the contrary, the male and female of organic creatures are rather faint and blurred reflections of masculine and feminine. Their reproductive functions, their differences in strength and size, partly exhibit but partly also confuse and misrepresent the real polarity. All this Ransom saw, as it were, with his own eyes. The two white creatures were sexless, but he of Malacandra was masculine, not male. She of Paralandra was feminine, not female. Quote. So, in reading this extended passage, we can see preemptively refuted many of the truisms which are going to be recited in defense of a female Aslan. We know these things are going to be said, and we know why they are false based just on this passage. What we're especially going to hear is that God, being without body, cannot be a man. So why can't we cast Aslan as a woman? Since Aslan is understood in the world of Narnia to be identical to Jesus Christ, true God, many people are going to say, oh, there's no problem. God transcends the categories of maleness and femaleness, so we can make Aslan a man or a woman. After all, Jesus Christ is not a lion, so why can't we make Christ's manifestation in Narnia as a female lion? Are you looking to grow in your faith while earning your degree? At St. Athanasius College, you can complete a bachelor's in leadership and management or theology and church ministry, all taught by Orthodox instructors who share your faith. Our program is designed for working adults. You'll take one course at a time, with the classes in the evenings to fit your schedule. New courses start every 5 weeks, so you can join whenever you're ready. Use the code Hamilton75 to waive your application fee and start completing your bachelor's degree today. But what we see in Lewis's vision of the world is that our sexed bodies are themselves pointers to something else. The primordial, fundamental archetype, which is typified in maleness and femaleness, is the polarity between the masculine and the feminine. And this polarity holds true for things that cannot be classified as male or female. Now, Lewis has been misunderstood in this passage as asserting that all languages consistently categorize the same words as masculine or feminine. That is, that all languages make a mountain grammatically masculine in gender. And that's not the case, and he's not saying that's the case. What he is saying is that grammatical gender is a widespread feature of many languages, and that grammatical gender is consistently correlated with biological sex. So different nouns in different languages may have one or the other grammatical genders, but male persons are always going to be designated with grammatically masculine pronouns, and so on and so forth. We can also see in Narnia that the masculine identity of Aslan is crucial for the functioning of the story. We first read of Aslan when the 4 children are with the beavers who recited them a prophecy. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. When he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. The mane is what visibly distinguishes a lion from a lioness. There's no ambiguity about it. If you see a lion with a mane, you know you are looking at a male lion. And it's the mane here that plays a critical role in Aslan's identity. This is the introduction to the character, and his mane is the instrument by which the world comes to its redemption. And it's no accident that when Aslan is going to his passion, and when he's giving his life for the redemption of Edmund, what does the witch do? She ritually shaves his mane as a demonstration of her power over him. So it's not an accident that in Lewis's vision of the world being inverted, you have a female villain who is shaving the symbol of the masculine glory of Aslan. Now, in Lewis's vision of sex and gender is, of course, very controversial for those who don't share the fundamental convictions of the Christian faith. But what he's doing here is deeply rooted in Scripture and tradition. But the real question that we want to probe even more deeply is why this is the case, both in Lewis's vision and in reality. Why is the badge of Aslan's masculine identity also the source of his power? In order to understand this, I want to go beyond Lewis a little bit and sketch out the scriptural vision of a gendered polarity, a vision which coincides with the traditional view of the world for which Lewis was an ambassador. The Bible concludes with a marriage. The Bible concludes with a marriage between Jesus Christ, the divine bridegroom, and the church, the bride. And in fact, there's a whole fabric of echoes in the book of Revelation between Christ and the church and the bridegroom and the bride as they're described in the Song of Solomon. In Revelation 21, the New Jerusalem, representing the totality of creation, as it does in Isaiah 65 and 66, where God creates Jerusalem to be a joy, and then in the same context, he creates a new heaven and a new earth. The whole world is, in other words, folded into this city, which is a transfigured form of the world. The New Jerusalem descends out of heaven and is prepared as a bride for Christ, the bridegroom. In its concluding vision in Revelation 21, the scriptures bring the themes introduced in Genesis 1 full circle. For Genesis 1 as well begins with the creation of a dyadic reality, heaven and earth. And the last created being, Genesis 1, that is man, the human family, is similarly dyadic, male and female. We find, moreover, that Genesis 2:4, giving a more detailed account of the creation of mankind, describes heaven and earth as analogous to a married couple procreating children. The text says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Generations of means offspring of. This is a phrase which is used many times in Genesis, and it always refers to genealogical descent. Man, in other words, is the offspring of the union of heaven, represented by the Spirit of God, the breath of life, and earth, in other words, the dust of the ground, which is described in terms of the union between male and female. We similarly find in texts like Ezekiel 16 and the book of Jeremiah that God is described as the divine bridegroom. But why? Well, when the New Testament describes man as the head of the wife, the word also has an aspect of its meaning which can be rendered as source. Man is head of the wife because, in a sense, he is the source, the determinative principle. The king is the head of the nation because his will determines the structure and life of the nation. These two ideas go together. And indeed, this is what we find in Genesis 2. The woman is taken from the side of the man. This is another aspect of biblical anthropology, which is really missed by a lot of the evangelical, complementarian, egalitarian debate. Male headship in marriage is not just something about playing a designated role, as if God commanded the man to be the head of the wife, but he could have in another world commanded the woman to be the head of the husband. No, the commandment derives from something which is embedded in human nature itself. Commandment follows out the descriptive. Prescription follows description. Our sexed bodies concretize the polarity of masculine and feminine. And these polarities exist in relation to each other. This is why when we think about opposition is not just something which happens when two things are unlike in every way. Opposition captures the dynamic of likeness and unlikeness in relation. If I stand opposite a person, my back is not towards them. I'm face to face with them, and that's important to what it means to exist in opposition to other things. Now, this polarity, masculinity and femininity, its cosmic significance and its concretization in maleness and femaleness is something we all know about. Okay, we all do. It takes a lot of mental energy to deny the reality and force of these energies. So when children enter adolescence, there is an extremely intense and undeniable energy that arises when men and women come into regular social contact. So, what do most people really remember about their high school years? I can tell you, it is not high school geology, okay? It has a lot more to do with the context that you have with the opposite sex because we are wired up this way and nothing can change it. Wherever this contact exists, it invariably changes the nature of the dynamic in the social organism. It is not merely adding a new person to a pre-existing society, but when we take an all-women's society and we add a man in there, it's not just adding someone new. You change the quality of everything because a new relation arises, which is extremely powerful. It's woven into us, and that relation flows through the energy of the whole. Now again, many people don't like this fact, but it is a fact. We know it's a fact. And at the very least, Lewis believed it was a fact, and this is his world. Now, the more interesting question is not really whether what I just said is true or not. I think in some form it is self-evidently the case. The really interesting question is why it is true and what it means. Masculinity, I would suggest, signifies a relation of initiation, movement towards. Femininity is not passive, but is innately responsive and receptive, leading towards reciprocity. This is why, by the way, men are expected to initiate a romantic relationship. No matter how unfair this may feel, it's a fact that's wired into our natures as a general rule, and the rule holds very broadly. Even if a woman is an ardent feminist, she is generally going to respond better to the man initiating a relationship. And even if the man doesn't like this, he's still going to be expected at an intuitive level to do so. It's wired into our natures, and we don't choose our natures. What's important to understand is that both polarities are present in us according to our different relations, even though we are either male or female. So, for example, both mother and father are masculine in relation to their children. The children are capable of receiving love and reciprocating it to their parents. The relationship should not depend on the children's moods. Like Lewis's Paralandra, the children are feminine. Their moods and personalities shift regularly. The parents are the rock and the source of stability. A mother is masculine in relation to her infant son, even though the mother is female and the son is male. I would suggest to you, moreover, that we see this meaning woven into our normal pattern of development. All human beings begin as children and thus begin as feminine. Whether we're male or female, as a 3-year-old, we're all feminine. It is not, therefore, that we start with low voices and watch the voices of girls heighten in pitch as they mature. It's the other way around. We all start with a feminine voice, and the boys hear their voices deepen as they mature. They begin as feminine, but they grow into a masculine identity. We can extend this polarity even further. Even children will generally assume a masculine posture in relation to the family home, space, and pets. Children will be the structural principle of their space. They will take on chores from an early age. They will take care of their animals, not vice versa. And we find this embedded in our common pattern of speech. We read, for example, of animal husbandry, to take care of and look after and manage animals is to stand as a husband in a masculine role in relation to one's beasts. Yet in relation to God, we are all, without exception, feminine. That is, we're all identified, whether male or female, as the bride of Christ, which is the church. We stand before God, male or female, as feminine. For in relation to him, we are constantly changing and in a state of utter dependence on the one who structures our life. We love him because he first loved us. He sought us out, drew us to himself, and gave us new life, not the other way around. In other words, he initiated the relationship. And it's this polarity which defines God's relation to us. There are arguably mysterious senses in which the feminine archetype is found in the intra-Trinitarian life of God. But there's a reason that feminine images of God are so rare in the Bible. God is not called a he out of cultural convention or convenience or for lack of considering an alternative. Priestesses and goddesses are, after all, known throughout ancient civilizations, but they are not known in the religion of Moses, the prophets, Jesus, or the apostles. God's relation to creation is infinitely masculine, for creation exists in total dependence and complete responsiveness to his will. That is why Aslan shaking his mane is what leads to the renewal of the world and its setting to rights. That is why Aslan soon after promises Mr. Beaver that all names will be soon restored to their rightful place. He becomes the structural and unifying principle of the world. He is the one who can give things their proper name because he is the one who endows them with their nature and identity, and they are unified in terms of their relation to him. He takes on the masculine identity because objectively, as that world's creator, he stands as masculine in relation to it. These are at very least the ideological presuppositions which governs Lewis's fictional universe. To take Aslan and make him into a lioness is to do what the witch did, to shave his mane and break the backbone of the story at its most fundamental level. It's hard to suppose this is anything other than intentional subversion. But at this point, it's barely shocking. It resembles an aging hippie protesting for legal marijuana in a state which legalized it a decade ago. It's boring, and as disappointing as this apparent news is, we will all forget about it. But I'm glad it gave us the opportunity to reflect on the inner meaning that God has woven into creation from top to bottom.
If you enjoy this content, please consider supporting this channel as a patron or paid Substack subscriber. I post reflections on Scripture 6 days a week, and 3 of these posts are exclusive to those who are patrons or paid subscribers on Substack at $5 per month. At $10 per month, patrons have access both to all of my written content as well as to weekly exclusive videos of about a half hour per week. At $30 per month, patrons have access to all of the preceding as well as a weekly class on the Old Testament of about an hour to an hour and a half each. Finally, at $35 per month, patrons receive access to all of my written and recorded exclusive content, as well as the ability to schedule monthly calls of 1 hour every month, as long as you remain a patron at this level. You can also access these benefits through channel memberships on YouTube. Please also consider purchasing my lecture sets, Answering Protestantism from the Bible, 17 hours, and Answering Calvinism from the Bible, 6.5 hours. These can be purchased either individually or together for a discount. All links are in the description box and pinned comment. Your support, both financially and especially through your daily prayers, is what enables me to produce regular, high quality, and original content. Thank you so much.